All right, let's dive into one of society's biggest, most persistent problems with an idea so provocative, it might just challenge everything you think you know. When we talk about poverty, are we talking about a personal failing, or is it really just about not having enough money in the bank? Let's find out.
So, we have to start with a really uncomfortable question, one that kind of hangs in the air during policy debates. The historian Rutger Bregman just puts it out there, bluntly. Why does it seem like people who are in poverty so often make choices that just keep them there?
For the longest time, the answer, whether it was said out loud or just implied, was basically this, that poverty is some kind of personality defect. It's this deep-seated belief that, if people would just work a little harder, save more, make better choices, well, they wouldn't be poor.
And look, on the surface, you can kind of see why people might think that. The data seems to back it up. People in poverty often carry more debt, they save less, and they might have less healthy habits. It's really easy to look at this list and see it as proof of a personality defect. But what if we're reading this evidence completely backward?
This is where the whole story takes a fascinating turn. A group of American psychologists decided to challenge that old assumption. They asked a totally different question. What if the problem isn't the person's character at all, but the actual context, the environment of poverty itself? So to test this, they did something pretty incredible. They traveled more than 8,000 miles to India to conduct this amazing real-world study. And here's the key. They didn't compare rich people to poor people. No, they studied the very same people at different times of the year, a community of sugarcane farmers.
Now, this is the brilliant part of the study. These farmers have this really unique financial cycle. See, they get almost all of their income for the entire year in one big payment right after the harvest. So, in the months before the harvest, their cash is running out. They're financially strained. They are, for all intents and purposes, poor. But then, after the harvest, they're flush with cash. They're rich. We're talking about the exact same people, just in two totally different financial situations.
So, the researchers gave the farmers IQ tests before the harvest, when money was tight, and then they tested them again after, when they were financially secure. And the results? Whoa! They were absolutely staggering. The very same farmers scored, on average, a full 14 points lower on their IQ tests before the harvest. Okay, a 14-point drop. What does that even mean? Well, to put that into perspective, it's a huge deal. It's the same kind of cognitive drop you'd see from losing an entire night of sleep, or from the long-term effects of alcoholism. This wasn't about how smart they were. It was about the unbelievable mental burden that poverty puts on a person.
This incredible discovery led to a powerful new theory for what's really going on here. It's called the Scarcity Trap, and it's all about how the constant, grinding pressure of having too little actually changes the way our brains function.
I mean, just think about it for a second. When you are constantly, day in and day out, worried about something you don't have enough of, money for rent, food on the table, your brain gets completely fixated on it. This scarcity mentality basically hijacks all of your attention, which means you have way less mental bandwidth for everything else, like planning for the future or problem solving, or even simple things like remembering to take your medicine.
Here's a really great way to picture it. Think of your brain as a super powerful computer. Now, imagine that being in poverty forces that computer to run dozens of really demanding programs in the background, all the time. Non-stop cycles of, how do I pay the bills? What about the debt? Can we make rent? Well, just like a real computer, your brain starts to slow down. It makes more errors, it crashes. It's not a hardware problem, right? It's a bandwidth problem.
The writer George Orwell really just nailed the essence of this. He said, "Poverty annihilates the future." And that's exactly it. When all of your mental energy is just consumed with trying to survive today, you literally don't have the cognitive space to plan for or even to dream about a different tomorrow. The future just gets erased.
Okay, so let's just pause here. If the root problem isn't some deep character flaw, but simply a lack of cash, well, that leads to a pretty radical and maybe shockingly simple question. What if the solution is just giving people money? And that idea has a name, Universal Basic Income, or UBI for short. It's not some complicated welfare program with a million rules. It's simple. It's a floor, a safety net that no one can fall through, just a regular, unconditional payment to every citizen. Enough to cover the absolute basics. Think of it less as a handout and more like a basic right, like an economic foundation.
And look, I know this might sound like some sci-fi, futuristic idea, but it's not new at all. In fact, it's been championed by all sorts of thinkers from across the political spectrum for decades, including people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who saw it as the clearest, most direct way to finally end poverty. Okay, so it sounds good in theory, but does it actually work in the real world? To find out, we have to go to a small town in Canada that, for a few years, became the site of a truly remarkable experiment. It was a town that, for a short time, basically eliminated poverty.
So back in 1974, everyone in the town of Dauphin, Canada, was guaranteed a basic income. But just 4 years in, a new government came to power and shut the whole thing down. And all the data, I mean all of it, 2,000 boxes worth, was just packed up and stuck in storage. And for 25 years, it was just forgotten, until a professor named Evelyn Forget heard about it and actually tracked it down.
And what she found in those dusty old boxes was just mind-blowing. First off, hospitalizations dropped by an incredible 8.5%. Think about that. With less financial stress weighing them down, people were just healthier, both mentally and physically.
And it wasn't just the adults who benefited. The positive effects trickled down to the next generation. As you can see here, kids' performance in school shot up. With more stability at home, they were just in a much better position to learn and succeed.
And the list of good news just kept going. Reports of domestic violence went down, and this is the big one, right? The question everyone asks. It totally debunked the myth that if you give people free money, they'll become lazy. People did not stop working. The only two groups who worked a tiny bit less were new moms who could now afford to spend more time with their babies, and teenage boys who stayed in school to graduate instead of dropping out to work.
You see how this just completely flips the script? The question is no longer, can we afford to give everyone a basic income? The real question we should be asking is, can we possibly afford the enormous ongoing cost of poverty?
Just take a look at these numbers for the US. They're pretty eye-watering. The estimated cost of child poverty every single year, when you add up extra healthcare costs, crime, lost economic potential, is a staggering $500 billion. Now, compare that to the estimated cost to lift every single family out of poverty with a basic income, about $175 billion. We are literally paying almost 3 times more to maintain poverty than it would cost us to end it.
And that really brings us to the biggest, most important point of all. This isn't just about balancing budgets. It's an investment in our collective human potential. Just imagine for a second all the creativity, the innovation, the art, the scientific breakthroughs that are being lost every single day because brilliant minds are trapped in that scarcity loop, just trying to survive. What could we as a society achieve if everyone was free to contribute their absolute best? So we end up right back where we started, but now with a completely different answer. The evidence is pretty clear. Poverty isn't some failing of character, it's a trap that taxes our minds and robs us of our future. And the solution? Well, it might just be a whole lot simpler than we ever dared to imagine. As Rutger Bregman puts it so perfectly, poverty isn't a lack of character, it's a lack of cash. Thanks for tuning in.